Just days before his murder trial was set to begin, Keefe D made a move that could change everything. His legal team has filed a request that could stop the Tupac murder case before it ever reaches a jury. Let me catch you up. Jury selection in the Tupac Shakur murder trial is supposed to begin on August 10. That is the date everyone has circled for over a year. The date Dwayne Keefe D. Davis finally faces a jury for the killing of Tupac Shakur. And right as that date closes in, his defense team filed a motion asking the judge to throw the whole case out. This isn't a small procedural request, with jury selection in the long-awaited Tupac Shakur murder trial scheduled to begin on August 10. Dwayne Keefe D. Davis's defense team made one final push to have the case thrown out before it reaches a jury. That's the move. Days before opening statements were supposed to start, Keefe D's lawyers went for broke. The attorney behind the filing is Mike Sanft, who's now leading Davis's defense. Sanft filed a motion seeking dismissal of the murder charge, arguing that the Clark County District Attorney's Office failed to build a case supported by sufficient evidence. That alone would be a bold argument this close to trial. But Sanft didn't stop there. Speaking with the U.S. Sun, Sanft said prosecutors should have never charged his client, and went as far as saying law enforcement owes Davis a written apology. Think about that for a second. This isn't just my client is innocent. This is a defense attorney, days before a murder trial, over one of the most famous unsolved killings in music history, publicly demanding an apology from the police who built the case. That's the shocking part. It's not just a legal maneuver. It's a public statement aimed at flipping the entire framing of the case, right when millions of eyes are about to turn toward that Las Vegas courtroom. To understand how big a swing this is, you have to understand what's actually on the line. Dwayne Davis, known to the streets and now to the world as Keefe D, is the only person who has ever been criminally charged in connection with Tupac's death. Not Suge Knight, not any of the rival Crips members who floated around the theories for decades. Just him, and the charge isn't manslaughter or accessory. It's murder with a deadly weapon carrying a gang enhancement. If convicted, he's looking at life in prison. So when his new lawyer stands up right before trial and says the DA never should have brought charges at all, that's not a throwaway comment. That's a direct challenge to almost 30 years of investigative work, 3 years of pre-trial fighting, and a case that Las Vegas prosecutors have already survived multiple attempts to kill. Because here's the thing, this is not the first time Keefe D's team has tried this. Back in January 2025, his attorney at the time, Carl Arnold, filed an almost identical motion to dismiss. The defense for Dwayne Keefe D. Davis filed a motion to dismiss all charges in the 1996 murder case of hip-hop legend Tupac Shakur, with Davis's attorney Carl Arnold claiming that the state of Nevada violated his client's constitutional rights, stating the violations are a product of a 27-year delay in prosecution, lack of corroborating evidence, and failure to honor immunity agreements granted by federal and local authorities. That motion got denied. Then his team took it to the Nevada Supreme Court. That's still sitting there, unresolved. Now, with the clock running out before trial, a different lawyer is trying the exact same play one more time, this time with a public demand for an apology attached to it. That's the headline. That's the move everyone's talking about. And whether it works or not, it's a signal that Keefe D's camp is not walking into that courtroom quietly. They are trying every lever available right up to the final week to keep this from ever reaching 12 jurors. The prosecution's response has been consistent from the start. They say they have more than enough. Las Vegas prosecutors say they have strong evidence that Keefe incriminated himself in a book that he wrote and released back in 2019, Compton Street Legend, as well as during many interviews he has given to police and media outlets since 2008. That's the tension driving this entire final stretch. A defense claiming there's nothing solid here beyond his own words, and a prosecution that says those words are exactly the evidence they need. So as the trial date sits right on the horizon, everything is converging at once: a last-ditch motion, a demand for an apology, a Nevada Supreme Court petition still hanging in the balance, and a man in his 60s who has spent years talking about a murder he now says he never should have been charged with. To understand how we got to this exact moment, you have to go back to where this all started, with a man who spent years bragging about a killing, until those same words became the reason he's sitting in a cell. Before there was a courtroom, before there was a trial date, before there was any of this legal back and forth, there was a book and a lot of talking. Dwayne Keefe Davis grew up in Compton, and by the 90s, he was a name inside the Southside Compton Crips. Over the years, the former Southside Compton Crips affiliate has spoken publicly about the shooting. That's the strange part of this whole saga. For almost 2 decades after Tupac was killed, The case sat cold, unsolved, filed away. And the one person who kept bringing it back to life again and again was Keefe himself. He gave interviews. He sat down with documentary crews. He wrote a memoir. In 2019, he released Compton Street Legend, and inside it, he laid out his version of what happened that night in Las Vegas. According to Davis's previous accounts, he provided the firearm used in the shooting of Shakur to his nephew, Orlando Anderson, who is believed to be the gunman responsible for Tupac's murder. That single admission that he handed over the gun became one of the central pieces prosecutors would eventually build their case around. To understand why that gun mattered so much, you need the full picture of that September night. Prosecutors allege Davis played a key role in the attack, provided the firearm, and was in the vehicle that pulled up alongside Tupac and Suge Knight on the Las Vegas Strip on September 7, 1996, when Tupac, 25, was shot 4 times and died 6 days later, while Suge Knight was injured but survived. It happened hours after a brawl at the MGM Grand, following a Mike Tyson fight, a brawl that involved Tupac's crew and Orlando Anderson, Keefe nephew. For years, Keefe framed what happened next as retaliation for that fight. In his own memoir, he was blunt about the motive, essentially arguing that once his nephew got jumped, that gave them the green light to do something back. That kind of language on the page, in his own book, is exactly the kind of self-incrimination prosecutors love to build a case on. But here's where it gets messy, and where his defense has tried to find an opening. Over the years, the former Southside Compton Crips affiliate has spoken publicly about the shooting. At times, he placed himself at the scene. Other times, he insisted he exaggerated details to sell books or land interviews, and his statements have further complicated the case and its investigation. So you've got a man who spent almost 2 decades confessing, half confessing, bragging, backtracking, and confessing again. That inconsistency cuts both ways. Prosecutors say it shows guilt he can't hide. His lawyers say it shows a man who was performing for cameras and book sales, not describing real events. Then came the arrest. After years of these public statements circulating, Las Vegas investigators moved. Keefe has been incarcerated since he was arrested on September 29, 2023, in Henderson, Nevada, as prosecutors allege that he was involved in the killing of Tupac, and the former gang member has pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder for allegedly being involved in the killing of the Juice actor. That arrest, coming 27 years after the murder, made him the only person in history ever criminally charged in connection with Tupac's death. Since then, Davis has been held without bail. Clark District Court Judge Carly Kearney denied Davis' request for bail in August after the legitimacy of the bond money was put into question, and Davis has pleaded not guilty. He's been sitting in the Clark County Detention Center and later moved into the Nevada State prison system, while his lawyers have thrown everything they can at the case. And it hasn't just been legal filings. In late 2024, while awaiting trial, Davis got into a physical fight with another inmate. Davis changed legal teams in August, hiring Draskovich and Michael Pandulo to represent him, after he was found guilty of fighting another inmate while in Clark County Detention Center, and he was sentenced to 16 to 40 months in prison with credit for time served. He didn't take that quietly either. Speaking after the sentencing, he insisted he was only protecting himself, framing the whole incident as an attack he didn't start. That jail fight ended up reshaping his entire defense. It's part of why he's gone through multiple attorneys over the life of this case, from Carl Arnold to Robert Draskovich and Michael Pandulo, to now Mike Sanft leading the final charge before trial. Each time the legal team shifted, the strategy shifted with it. Some leaned hard into the immunity argument. Some leaned into attacking the physical evidence. The latest lawyer is leaning into attacking the DA's entire decision to charge him in the first place. So by the time we get to this final pretrial motion, you're looking at a defendant who spent years talking his way into a case, then spent years trying to talk or litigate his way back out of it. 60-some years old, health issues from a past cancer diagnosis, sitting in prison, and still fighting with everything he has to avoid a jury ever hearing the word guilty read out loud. But talking wasn't his only weapon. His lawyers have been building legal arguments just as aggressively as he's been building headlines, and that fight over the law is where this case has actually lived for the last 2 years. If you strip away the headlines about apologies and bounties, the real story of this case for the last 18 months has been a slow, grinding war over one question. Does the state actually have enough to put Keefe in front of a jury? That fight has played out in 4 or 5 distinct battles, and each one has chipped away, or tried to chip away at the foundation of the prosecution's case. The first big swing came in January 2025. It took nearly 30 years after the fact to arrest the only man ever charged with the murder of Tupac Shakur. And that alleged killer's lawyer said that delay is exactly one of the reasons those charges should be dismissed, arguing Davis's constitutional rights had been violated through an unjustified lengthy lag time, making for dimming of memories, the death or disappearance of witnesses, and the loss or destruction of material physical evidence. It's a real argument. Nearly 3 decades is an enormous amount of time for memories to fade and evidence to vanish. But the judge overseeing the case, Carly Kearney, wasn't convinced. Judge Carly Kearney rejected the defense motion to dismiss, finding no proof of a binding immunity deal, and no prejudicial intent behind the 27-year delay, and the murder charge stood. That ruling should have been the end of that argument. Instead, it turned into round 2. In the summer of 2025, Davis's team escalated things by going over Kearney's head entirely. On July 29, 2025, Arnold filed a writ of mandamus, asking the Nevada Supreme Court to overturn Kearney's denial and either dismiss the indictment or force prosecutors to show they hold admissible evidence beyond Keefe D's own recountings. And as of the most recent filings, the High Court had not ruled, making it the single biggest open variable in the case. That petition is worth sitting with for a second, because it gets at the heart of the entire defense strategy. It's not really arguing Keefe D is innocent. It's arguing the state doesn't have anything beyond his own words, the book, the interviews, the confessions, and that if those statements are protected by old immunity deals, there's nothing left to prosecute. In the attorney's own words at the time, the case had captured worldwide attention, and the argument was framed around exactly that kind of scrutiny, that the world was watching whether Nevada would honor its own promises to a cooperating witness. The immunity claim itself traces back to interviews Davis gave federal and local investigators. Years before his arrest, attorney Carl E.G. Arnold argued that the district court exceeded its authority by not determining if the state has admissible evidence beyond statements protected under proffer agreements with law enforcement from 1998. In plain terms, the argument is this: Keefe D talked to police under an agreement that his words wouldn't be used against him. So if the entire murder case is built on those same words, prosecutors broke their own deal. The DA's office and the trial court have consistently rejected that framing. And while the Nevada Supreme Court petition sat unresolved, the fight kept moving on other fronts. Late in 2025, the defense turned its attention to physical evidence, specifically materials pulled from Davis's home during a search back in 2023. A second front opened over a July 2023 nighttime search of Keefe D's home, where investigators seized materials they wanted in front of the jury, and the defense argued the night warrant was obtained in bad faith, leaning on a misleading portrait of a 60-year-old retired cancer survivor as a dangerous drug dealer based on convictions a quarter-century old. That argument got detailed and aggressive. The defense's own filing put it plainly, arguing that when officers obtain nighttime search authorization through bad faith, courts agree suppression is appropriate, and insisting that bad faith was evident on the face of the affidavit that got the warrant approved in the first place. They argued the court unwittingly relied on a misleading portrait of Davis as a dangerous drug dealer, when in fact, his drug convictions were 25 years old. That motion went nowhere too. At a hearing, a judge denied the motion, keeping the evidence from that nighttime search in play for trial. Then, just weeks before the case was set to go in front of a jury, another ruling landed against the defense. This time on one of the most damaging pieces of evidence prosecutors have, Davis's own recorded voice. A Nevada judge ruled that prosecutors may use a recorded 2008 police interview with Dwayne Keefe D. Davis during his upcoming trial, with Clark County District Court Judge Carly Kearney rejecting a defense effort to keep the recording away from the jury. That's a brutal loss for the defense right before trial. That 2008 interview is one of the earliest instances of Davis discussing his knowledge of the shooting to investigators, and now a jury is going to hear it in his own voice. So line them all up. Motion to dismiss on due process grounds, denied. Writ of mandamus to the state's highest court, still pending, no ruling. Motion to suppress the home search evidence, denied. Motion to keep the 2008 police interview from the jury, denied. Every single legal lever the defense has pulled over the last year and a half, has either failed outright or is stuck waiting on a court that hasn't moved. That's the real context behind the newest motion, the one demanding dismissal and an apology filed right as jury selection approaches. It's not coming from a position of legal momentum. It's coming after a string of losses, with the Nevada Supreme Court sitting silent on the one avenue that could still blow the whole case up before it starts. Whether that pattern continues or finally breaks is exactly what makes the coming days so tense. But the legal fight over evidence and procedure is only half of what's kept this case in headlines for 2 years running. The other half has a much bigger name attached to it. No part of this case has traveled further outside the courtroom than the allegation that another music industry giant paid to have Tupac killed. And that allegation didn't come from a tabloid. It came straight from Keefe D himself, years before his arrest, sitting across from investigators. Keefe D told investigators that Sean Diddy Combs offered $1 million to have Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight killed, according to a Drug Enforcement Administration report tied to his murder trial, with the allegation originally made in confidential police interviews from 2008 and 2009 that resurfaced in a document obtained by USA Today. The specific wording attributed to Combs, according to that resurfaced report, described him saying he'd give anything for those two men's heads. That's an explosive claim on its own. But what makes it stick around in headlines year after year is what came next, according to Keefe D's own account. In previously unreleased audio from 2008, which surfaced in August 2024. Through the murder rap documentary, Keefe D said he spent years trying to collect the $1 million from Diddy, claiming he initially sent an associate named Von Zip to retrieve the money, but that the money disappeared with him instead, leading Keefe D to say the betrayal ultimately led him to speak out. Think about the motive that creates. If Keefe D's account is to be believed, he wasn't just talking about a decades-old murder out of guilt or bravado. Part of what pushed him into interviews and books, by his own telling, was frustration over money he says he never got paid. That's a strange, almost mundane detail sitting inside one of hip-hop's darkest mysteries. A dispute over an unpaid bounty allegedly kept the story alive for over a decade. Prosecutors have never treated the Diddy allegation as part of their actual case. Despite the headlines, investigators moved quickly to cool the Diddy theory, with law enforcement signaling that Combs had never been a suspect in Tupac's murder, and that they did not credit Keefe D's claims of his involvement, directly or indirectly. Combs himself has pushed back hard on all of it. Combs has vehemently denied any involvement. But even with law enforcement distancing itself from the theory, the paper trail around it kept growing. Court filings reveal Keefe D's claim that Sean Diddy Combs placed a $1 million bounty on Tupac and Suge Knight. Documents reportedly name Combs roughly 77 times. 77 mentions across the record is not nothing, even with prosecutors saying they don't credit the claim. The volume alone kept the allegations circulating through every stage of this case. And it wasn't just circulating in court filings. Separate civil litigation against Combs, unrelated to the murder charge, brought its own disturbing detail into the conversation. In February 2025, another accuser, a male escort, filed a lawsuit alleging sexual assault by Diddy. And within that case, the accuser claimed Combs made a chilling reference to Tupac's death during their encounter, allegedly saying something to the effect of asking what would happen to the accuser if Combs could get Tupac killed. That lawsuit had nothing to do with Keefe D's murder case directly, but it landed right in the middle of the same news cycle, and it kept the Tupac-Diddy connection alive in an entirely separate legal arena. Around the same time all of this was surfacing, Combs was dealing with his own massive federal trial. He recently faced a major federal trial on sex trafficking and RICO charges, with the jury acquitting him on those counts, but convicting him on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, leaving him exposed to a possible prison sentence of up to 20 years, though prosecutors recommended just 4 years. So for a stretch of time, you had 2 separate, enormous legal stories about Combs running in parallel. One about trafficking charges, and one where his name kept surfacing inside a decades-old murder case he's never been charged in. That overlap didn't go unnoticed by Tupac's own family. Once the bounty allegation became part of the official record opposing Keefe D's bail request, the family moved fast. Tupac's surviving relatives retained attorneys Alex Spiro and Christopher Clore, along with a team of investigators to dig into Keefe D's allegations that Combs had offered money to have the rapper killed. That early move wasn't just symbolic. It eventually turned into something much bigger, an actual lawsuit. The criminal case is no longer the only arena. Maurice Mopreme Shakur, Tupac's stepbrother, acting as administrator of the estate of his late father Mutulu Shakur, filed a wrongful death suit naming Keefe D and unnamed additional defendants, invoking a discovery rule to argue the clock only started once grand jury transcripts, and a documentary revealed a broader conspiracy than simple retaliation. That's a huge development sitting quietly alongside the criminal case. It means even if the criminal trial ends in an acquittal, or if that pending Nevada Supreme Court petition somehow blows the whole prosecution up, there's now a separate civil track where the family is pursuing accountability on their own terms, built specifically around the idea that this was bigger than one retaliatory shooting. So by the time you zoom out on the Diddy angle, you're looking at claims that started as one man's confession to federal agents, got buried for over a decade, resurfaced through leaked audio and old DEA paperwork, showed up dozens of times in unrelated court filings, connected to an entirely separate sexual assault lawsuit, and ultimately helped push Tupac's own family into launching a wrongful death case of their own. None of it has resulted in charges against Combs, but all of it has kept swirling around the edges of Keefe D's case, right up until this final stretch before trial. And that final stretch, everything converging in these last days before August 10, is exactly where this story stands right now. Everything in this case has been building toward one date, and that date is almost here. August 10 is when jury selection is supposed to begin, and in the days leading up to it, nearly every open thread in this case has been forced to a head at the same time. Start with the trial's own long, bumpy road to this point. This was never supposed to take this long. The murder trial for Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, the only person ever charged in connection with the killing of Tupac Shakur, was initially set to go to trial in mid-March, before a judge pushed the date to Feb 9, 2026, after his defense team asked for more time to interview witnesses they said could prove he wasn't present at the shooting. Then it got pushed again. District Court Judge Carly Kearney reset the trial to begin on August 10, 2026. A delay of 6 months from the previously scheduled Feb 9 start date, after Davis's attorney told the court the amount of discovery to comb through was voluminous. 2 delays, both requested by the defense, both granted without a fight from prosecutors. That in itself tells you something. The state has been confident enough in its case to not push back on giving the defense more rope, more time, more room to prepare. And now that rope has run out. Once the case landed on this final date, everything else compressed into these last few weeks. The Nevada Supreme Court petition is still sitting there, unresolved, and if a ruling comes down before jury selection even starts, it could change everything overnight. If it doesn't, the case proceeds as scheduled, with that legal question hanging over the entire trial, like a loose thread nobody's tied off. The evidentiary rulings landed one after another right before the finish line too. The 2008 recorded interview, greenlit for the jury. The home search evidence, greenlit for the jury. Each of those rulings stripped away one more possible exit ramp for the defense, which helps explain why the newest filing swings so hard in the opposite direction. Not narrow arguments about a single piece of evidence, but a full request to kill the case entirely, and a public demand that law enforcement apologize for ever bringing it. And that request lands at a moment where Davis himself hasn't gone quiet either. Even while his lawyers argue in filings that the state never should have charged him, Davis has kept talking publicly, the same instinct that got him into this mess in the first place. In an interview with the Art of Dialogue podcast, Davis insisted the state has no evidence, saying they can't even place him at the scene, and that they don't have a gun, a car, or anything tying him to it, insisting everybody was on video except him. He's also expressed regret about ever discussing the case at all, reportedly saying more than once that he shouldn't have said anything, while maintaining his innocence and framing his current situation as something he's leaning on faith to get through. That's the contradiction sitting at the center of this entire case, right up to the final days before trial. A man who spent nearly 2 decades talking about a murder, in books, in interviews, on camera, now says the prosecution has nothing but his own words, and that those words should never have been enough to charge him in the first place. His lawyers are making that same argument in court. Right now, days before a jury is supposed to be seated, the prosecution's answer hasn't changed either. The confessions, the memoir, the recorded interviews, they say, are exactly the kind of evidence that gets people convicted. Whichever way that pending motion goes, whatever the Nevada Supreme Court eventually decides, one thing is already locked in. This case, which sat cold for 27 years, is now sitting on the edge of the one thing it never had before: a jury. Tupac's family is watching from both the criminal courtroom and their own civil case. Diddy's name keeps surfacing in the margins of testimony he's never had to answer to under oath. And Keefe, the man who talked his way into national headlines for over a decade, is making one final legal push to walk away before any of it gets tested in front of 12 strangers. If the case survives this last motion, jury selection begins as scheduled, and for the first time in almost 30 years, someone finally has to answer, under oath, in open court, for what happened to Tupac Shakur that night on the Las Vegas Strip.